Thank you, Luke. For those of you who've got these translators, I mean, obviously the Francophone have their interpreters. For those of you who are having trouble with Australian, Channel 1 should do it, all right? Okay.
This was my joke, but I resisted.
No, it's my joke. See, he's always stealing from me. Anyway, Luke, thank you very much for the 3 hours you've given me to do this presentation. I'll try to stick within that time frame. Okay, I'd like to start firstly with a disclaimer. I'm not pretending here to speak on behalf of the Government of South Australia or on behalf of the Department of Health and Ageing. These are my views, so if I get into trouble, you can all vouch for me that it was just me talking about me. The other thing that I want to just reflect on is that the purpose of this presentation is really to describe one approach that we've taken to action on the determinants of health. There are many more. This is really just one approach amongst many. In fact, it's one approach amongst many that we're doing within our own jurisdiction. I think the other cautions that I want to talk about is that this approach has emerged from within government. Some people certainly do health impact assessments outside of government, and they may take on a different flavour. There are issues and challenges and limitations on HIA approaches outside of government. Equally, there are also different challenges and limitations on what you can do from within government. Both also have opportunities, and I think that could be one of the things that we could explore in the workshop later. The other caution I'd mention is that this has developed in the local conditions of South Australia. So the question is what amount or what parts of this are transferable to your environment. It might be that the specific methods or techniques or processes are more adapted to our environment. I'd like to suggest that perhaps some of the underpinning values and principles that we emerge from and some of the basic critical thinking might be more applicable, but that's something really for you to explore. I think the other thing that I want to particularly recognise is indeed our debt to Quebec. We've stolen, I'm sorry, look, we stole stuff from Quebec. When I particularly started reviewing the legislation that supports and has grown out of these approaches, it didn't take me long to find what Quebec had been doing, and we very much appreciated the support we got from our colleagues here in Quebec, not just simply in terms of stealing particular parts of their legislation and then giving it a South Australian twist. So it's better now, Luke. You can borrow it back now. But also the but also the comradeship and the sense of what is possible. That they were able to, because they were in essence had their legislation almost 10 years before we got ours, so we were able to reflect on and point to Quebec as an example of what actually is possible. So that was extremely helpful. Thank you. Now, the other and final caution is one of the questions that you might ask is how much of this was actually planned? And my answer is just enough. The real caution here is that every successful strategy looks brilliantly planned in hindsight. But if you ask us on the way through, we would be saying, I don't know, we're making this up as we go along. And there's an element to that. The lesson there is that we had some particular strategic intents. How we got there depended upon the circumstances that we had to take. This is us. The state of South Australia is the bit in the middle, and most of us actually live in Adelaide, which I'll talk about in a moment. The other contextualising factor that I want to talk about is this. I want to stress this is not a beaver, okay? This is a koala. Now, the reason why I'm putting that up is, again, just to stress this point that we've grown out of our local conditions. The thing that there is actually some similarities between beavers and koalas, apart from the fact that they are very bad-tempered. They both, you don't actually see a hell of a lot of what they're actually doing. You know, most of what they're doing is kind of hidden. The beavers, most of its activity is underwater, correct? Whereas most of the activity of, well, such activity that there is, it doesn't move terribly much, is up in a tree. However, both of them are highly adapted to their own environments, and if their environment doesn't change too rapidly, they're extremely successful. The other thing is that by doing what they do best, they actually change their environments to actually improve their circumstances even more. For the beaver, it's chopping down trees and using them. For the koala, it's actually planting trees through its alimentary canal. But maybe we'll go into that in the workshop. Not a beaver. Okay, some basic facts about us. There's 1.5 million of us, mostly in the capital city of Adelaide. Our public health care system, in terms of budget size, is about $4 billion, a bit over $4 billion, which is approximately 30% of the state budget and growing, which is of concern to us, although I'm greatly relieved to know that Quebec is 48% and your society hasn't crumbled to dust. So I'll be taking that news back to our Treasury. It's actually one of the just about the largest employer in the state. There are about 30,000 people employed in the health system. And last year it was $125 million over budget, which in a budget of over $4 billion you might think is not too bad, except when you realise that $125 million equals or perhaps surpasses the budget of another whole government department. So it does actually have quite significance. So it's a problem, but we'll talk about that some more. In the beginning, we were doing a health impact assessment or variations on that theme, and however, the kind of response that we were getting from them were such that we had a lot of difficulty. Firstly, there was no clear mandate, and I'll be coming back to the point of mandate several times during this presentation. Often we were engaged quite late in the decision-making process, which meant that we weren't able to actually have much of an influence on final outcomes. So there was actually little chance for change, and we were perceived as being remote and judgmental in that process. And the other thing from our side is that perhaps as a result of those particular conditions, but also as a result of our own value stance, we tended to emphasise health above all other considerations, which meant that people perceived us a bit like that. The critic, the blowhard, the accuser, and the people that stopped. We, of course, perceived ourselves like this, that we were in the right, and we would chuck a thunderbolt at anybody who stood in our way. So whenever we came knocking on that door and trying to actually gain entry, this is kind of what happened. We didn't get very far, and that's because we were mainly perceived as the bearer of bad news. I think if I can summarise all this is that there's a very famous document which you would all know, which starts off with the phrase, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." In this process, there are no such thing as self-evident truths. What might be our truths, or what might we perceive as clear and solid evidence, is another language to another department or another agency. And I think we just need to have that as a cautionary thing. We, of course, didn't see ourselves as a bringer of bad news, but that was the perception. And as in politics, perception is indeed reality. So, what did we do? This is where we have to give acknowledgement to the work of Ilona Kickbush. She came to us really as a game changer. We needed to change the conversation. We needed to start from somewhere else. Ilona came to us fresh from the Finnish presidency conference on health in all policies. She was a keynote speaker there. And we were able to attract her to South Australia through a scheme called the Thinkers in Residence scheme, which was a scheme sponsored by the former Premier to bring world-class thinkers to South Australia to just get us moving in different directions. What did Ilona do? When you actually listen to her, she wasn't actually doing or saying very much different from what we were doing. You know, she was talking about the social determinants of health, how the healthcare system by itself couldn't really impact or change them, and there was a need to work through it, through those other sectors. But the main thing that was different is summed up in the phrase that you can't be a prophet in your own land. So because she was coming with both her own authority and charisma, but really with the same message, but she was able to put it in a different context. So in essence, what she particularly did was locate health within broader social goals. She emphasised the human capital dimensions and the economic gains that can be made by ensuring that health status can be improved in the population. But what she then also did was compliment the government on already having a mechanism in place to achieve it. She didn't come with saying, and you have to change everything to achieve it. You just have to slightly adjust. The state government had and still does have a statewide strategic plan. Most governments these days have some kind of overarching strategic vision or strategic plan. And what she said was, what you've already got will do the job. All you have to do is put a health lens over it so that you can see how health can contribute to helping you achieve your goals. There was no mention or even argument put forward by us or by her that the strategic plan had to recognise explicit health goals. What we were trying to do was look at how we could help other sectors. So the overall thing is that it's not so much about what other sectors could do for health, but what we could do for helping those other sectors achieve their goals. Or as my friends in Belfast when I went there said, when we told them that, was this is a plan so cunning that if you put a tail on it, you'd call it a weasel. She made a number of other recommendations, but basically the one that we went for was the getting health in all policies in place. The way we went about it was really taking it very slow in the first instance, and in the first year what we did was look at what we called a proof of concept, where we went and worked with other agencies who were prepared to put their hands up and develop an experiment with different processes and mechanisms. That worked extremely well, such that we got really our first mandate out of the state government. The Cabinet mandated this process as being a normal part of how they would roll out their strategic plan. We didn't ask for nor wanted a separate structure or separate governance process. We actually bonded with what the existing coordination and governance mechanisms were. And the group that oversighted us was a group of chief executives of other government agencies that were responsible for delivering on the statewide plan. Of very particular note is that the chief executive of the health department was not on that group, and that was quite deliberate and very important for us, because we wanted to make sure that it was publicly seen as not something that health was coming in and taking over, but health was there as a resource to support the work of the government. So, our new approach kind of looks something like that, which in a few words is that we were prepared to walk in others' shoes. and walk as far and as fast as we can to actually understand their points of view. This instrument on your right is available for sale if you would like to purchase it. It enhances our listening skills. Critical point in all this is that you have to start by listening, so you actually try and actually understand what the perspective of the other agency is, and be prepared to stop and collaborate. So, and underpinning that new approach and new thinking can be very much summed up by this famous phrase from Voltaire, and this is where you hear how terrible my French is. Le mieux est l'ennemi du bien. In other words, the perfect is the enemy of the good. One of the things that we found with our old approach is that people were so pure and committed to making sure that health was recognised and engaged and involved that it was put at the very top of all other considerations. Whereas our new approach was saying, okay, if we can just start a conversation, just start a dialogue, we don't have to be perfect at the outcome, we'll see how far we can get with this. The other touchstone for us actually comes from the Ottawa Charter. Now, when we mention the Ottawa Charter, most people go straight to those collection of strategies and take that as the guiding principles. For us, we decided to go back and actually read the preamble. And in the preamble, you'll find this phrase, that health is a resource for daily living and not an end in itself. And I think sometimes people in health forget that, because in health, that's our job. That's our primary focus. Whereas outside of the health system, it's not. And really what we need to do is look at how we can blend our issues and concerns, mon Dieu, our issues and concerns to make sure that it's covered. Two very important things that we added to our value base was complete humility, which, because I've worked with Luc for so long, is very difficult. You know, but I've managed to cleanse myself, and we're fine now. And respect for the other's side. Where does health impact assessment fits in? To paraphrase Carlos Dora last night, he talked about using HIAs as a free-form framework, and that's certainly what we did, but in our processes we put much more emphasis on engaging with the other agency, not as a simple stage at the beginning, but actually all the way through the process, and what we call navigation. This is one of the advantages of working within the government, which is that once a recommendation is made, it's not so much that we then leave it, because we're engaged with those agencies, we help them navigate it through. I think the thing that we stress is that whilst each individual project or issue that we look at might be important, it's the overall relationship and the strategic engagement over several years and several issues that we're actually trying to develop. There are some examples which I won't go into, but maybe we can pick them up in the workshop. But the impact on the way we did our normal, if you would call that HIAs, is that we actually got better at it because those values started to influence how we actually approached agencies more generally. Our mandate. As Timo said, a lot of the literature talks about the importance of having political commitment and high-level authorisation. However, what it often also says is that that's a prerequisite. The trouble with a prerequisite is that if you wait for your mandate, it will never come. What we did was build our mandate on the way, or in other words, we took a bit of a leap of faith and started to build our wings on the way down. Fortunately, the glue didn't come unstuck. And that was caused mainly by some very courageous managers within our Public Health Directorate who decided to create a policy space for us, which we can talk about during the workshop. But one of our essences was that it's always a good idea to convince someone else that it was their good idea. We've now moved on and into establishing a lot of these issues within our new South Australian Public Health Act, because we saw that legislation was in fact the strongest expression of a mandate, and what the Act does is actually embed HIA and HIAP values and principles, but not processes. So, lessons that have emerged from this. It is very important to have formality, have some kind of mandate, but recognise that it's something that has to be both built over time and indeed renewed over time. The other thing that is very important for us is to not get stuck with one thing and one thing only. We've continued to try and reinvent ourselves, to adapt to our environment, to be agile. Critical to all this is that we need to be seen to be useful, and we can talk about that in a bit more detail when we talk about some of the evaluation that we've done. And some of the things that we're now currently working on is this whole notion of subsidiarity. When we started these whole processes and this thinking, it was very much concentrated within one unit within the Public Health Directorate. To be honest, it still is largely there, even though people are very well aware of what we're doing. What the legislation does is provide us with a means to actually build some subsidiarity into this system, particularly through local government. So our next steps is to roll out this legislation, which we're in the process of doing, to strengthen the role of local government, to build stronger links between state governments, and to build procedures and processes that support this, so that we can integrate further into government decision making and integrated planning. In conclusion, just two thoughts that I want to go with. Firstly, it's this whole notion about when we use the term health in all policies, what's in it, or what's in a name. This is where I have to part some company, Linda, with using the term health in all policies as a noun, HiAP. I'm certainly aware that some of my colleagues back in South Australia also are using that, so it's something that's around. Apart from it sounding ugly on the ear, it's actually a health word. It's actually defining it in a secret language and health is very good at its own language. It's very hard to communicate. So I think I would prefer to think of something else. In fact, sometimes we might not even use the term health at all. So the first thought in terms of health in all policies, what is it? Is it a process that we use? Is it a goal of government? Or is it a slogan? I think if it becomes a slogan, we are in deep trouble. Our focus has been very much in this instance on process because that has the less threat to people. It's a process that's there to help. Yes, we're thinking about it as a goal of government, but that's at the end of the journey. We can't create the forest or the beaver dam at the beginning, so you can't start a journey at its end. So we're very much focused on process. So the other thing I want to talk about is my problem with this term, all. Health in all policies, for two reasons. I know that within health, when we use the term all, like in the slogan health for all or health in all policies, we're tapping into an egalitarian value, which is that we expect equity for all. Thinking about it from the outside, though, it has totalitarian implications to other government agencies and other sectors. Health in all policies. So I would like to make a few suggestions. I'd like to think about this term called HIP. Unfortunately, it doesn't translate well into French, but bear with me. So I'd like to suggest we use something like that, or not at all, which is, oh, by the way, there's another P there, so it's HIP. Some health in policies. What's it doing? Can you change it?
It's not closed.
Yeah. Some health in policies, please. Please, because we're working in the territory of the other sector, so we need to be humble and respectful. Some because it doesn't have to be in all, it doesn't have to be explicit. And it also gives me a much better word on the ear. SHIP. And that is very helpful for me, because that's exactly the kind of thing that we're doing. Ships have to tack and move and make their way on sometimes rough, sometimes calm seas, and to get to its destination it cannot travel in a straight line. It has to move all the time, and that's very much the essence of our approach. Thank you.